Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Fourth Level Conversations with Killeen and Stacy Harding. We're excited to be with you this morning. Al and I were chatting just a moment ago about what would be an interesting topic, and given the fact that we're right in the midst of the Olympic Games in Paris, France, and watching people both succeed and fail in their endeavor to get on the podium for a medal, we thought we'd talk a little bit about just how do we view success and failure. Al, good morning. How are you? And I'm excited to be with you.
Always excited to be with you, brother. Yeah, it is a good morning. Any day where you look down and you're above your feet, I suppose it's a good morning.
It is indeed. Well, Al, we were talking about this and the idea of, whether you're an Olympic athlete or you're competing in business or maybe you're competing in some level in your personal life, how we look at ourselves in relationship to success, or perhaps our perception of what success is and how we define it, may have a great deal to do with how we respond when we don't quite achieve that in the way that we're perceiving it. So I thought it'd be an interesting topic for us to say, how do we as competitors in business and life and in the Olympics, how do we see people viewing success or building their perceptions of that? We'll start there.
I think it's a good start. In fact, why don't you share with the folks what you were sharing with me about the runners that you were watching, Stacy, and who you focus on and why?
Yeah. So I have an interesting way that I watch the Olympics. It's great to see, Americans doing great and winning gold medals or getting at least on the podium. And I've over the years I've begun to watch those who don't get to the podium, or maybe they don't even qualify for the final race. And I was watching one last evening where a runner in the 400 hurdles in the home stretch hit the last hurdle and went crashing down. And of course, the cameras don't pan back to him because the race is finishing and there's a winner, a second place, and a third place, and then the fourth place that just missed the medal podium. And I thought about that, the reaction of the person who failed. And they've been training for 4 years to be in that race. And depending on their perception of success, maybe they would define success only if they were to win a medal. Maybe they're so competitive that it would only be successful if they won gold. Certainly, many athletes get disappointed with a silver or a bronze. But what happens to that individual that failed? How did they perceive the outcome of their efforts? How did they respond to it? Did they immediately feel like they had completely wasted 4 years of preparation, that they had let themselves down, their family down, and their country down, and that they would walk across that finish line in shame? And yet I thought about that and said, well, there were only 8 runners in that final, and that means you were one of 8 people in the world that qualified to be in that race. And most of us would look at that and say, you are a huge success, regardless of the medal outcomes. So I don't know, Al, that was just kind of an interesting thing that struck me last night is there's jubilation for the winners. And yet what happened to those who worked just as hard as the winners to be there, but something happened or they just weren't good enough to get on the podium? And how do they feel today?
Yeah, and it seems to me that the way to process questions like that are big questions is to start with at least awareness, if not outright agreement, on how we're defining the key term of, in this case, success. So, how do you think level 3 ego based people define success versus level 4 values personifying people, Stacey?
Well, level 3 ego would be, as I was describing, I think that you're driven to get on the podium and win. And that if you do that, it validates your ego, that you're
Mhm.
so good, you're one of the best in the world, if not the best. We call the 100-meter sprinter the fastest person on earth. And so the ego would be fulfilled with that, and I think it would even blossom in the mind of the person that wins. And we hear that in kind of sometimes the responses it is refreshing when we hear someone humbly say, I'm so humbled to be here and honored that I was able to do this for my country. And perhaps when they're on the podium listening to the national anthem, they're having the emotional response to the impact of that success. But I also wonder if the ego is the way that that success is viewed, if there isn't a moment that is beyond the games where they sit back and say, it's fleeting, that adrenaline, that joy, that elation, it's fleeting. Now what do I do? I'm reminded of the movie of Chariots of Fire, and the one competitor in England that didn't win, but had spent so much time preparing for the race against Eric Liddell that when it was over, he went to complete depression, thinking his life had no meaning. And so I wonder if the ego responds to, I better go do it again because I got to stay up there and stay in the limelight and all those things. What do you think?
Yeah, as you're speaking, what occurs to me is that maybe we could break it down, or I could at least opine that the comparison of how level 3 versus level 4 sees success is a matter of emphasis on the outside world's impression of us, which level 3 ego wants, desires, and needs for its own self-validation to keep the ego alive and feeling worthy and even superior to other people. So it tends to see it as a competition against others to prove my superiority so I can feel superior and therefore have an enlarged sense of ego and importance, and that's validated by outside circumstances and me competing against other people. Maybe level 4 success is about competing against who you were yesterday, or even not competing, but a measure of internal character, of resolve, resiliency going forward. It seems to me that success is very narrow and conditionally defined from the ego, that if these conditions happen and I happen to train 4 years and then I win and the world is giving me accolades, fabulous. But I've been noticing lately, watching old videos of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson having shared interviews together, and their love and regard for each other, of who they were 40, 50 years ago competing against each other. And back then, they hated each other on the court, and they were two of the best to ever play, fighting each other. And today, they're fast friends, and they're busy talking about how fabulous the other guy is. But what is it that we really view as success beyond um, the contest, beyond some event where we're contesting? I would offer the opinion that level 4 success is conquest of the self, and level 3 success is the conquest of others. I'm reminded of a story of a dear friend of ours that you and I both know very well, a guy named Jimmy Hunter, who was a repeatedly successful Ironman competitor. And he always told a story about how he would train 5 hours a day for years to get ready for an Ironman, where they swim 2.2 miles, they ride a bike, I think 120 miles, and then they run a full marathon, 26 miles, all in a row. And how he prepared because his dream, his goal was to be in the top 5 of men over the age of 50 in Hawaii, which is the Super Bowl of Ironman. And he'd won all these other Ironmen, which is what you need to do to even be able to be invited to Hawaii. So 1,500 of the world's top athletes, Ironmen, go to Hawaii to do this Super Bowl of being an Ironman. And he swims in the ocean 2.2 miles, and he says it's like being in a washing machine. Then he's riding his bike, and this is on the big island of Hawaii. He's riding his bike, and they have to ride up this mountain on a god-awful hot day through lava fields. And I think he was 50 or 51 when he did this. And he said, I'd look over and see men half my age in tears on the side because it was so hot and so hard. And he got to the top of the mountain, and he pulled over, and he said, he thought, maybe I need to quit. I'm exhausted, and other people have quit younger than me and all that. I could use the my bike chain as an excuse or whatever. But he looked at the ocean, looked at the sky, and realized, no, I've come this far. I need to keep going. So he rode down the mountain on his bike, ran the 26 miles, and as it happened, running was his best event. And he noted that he had been on the sideline for like, I don't know, 56 seconds or something, waiting. And so he runs, and wouldn't you know, he finishes sixth place. So he doesn't get to be one of the five on the podium. And so his takeaway wasn't, I'm a failure, I'm a quitter, I blew it. His takeaway was never get off the path and stop trying, even for a minute, because he had gotten on the sidelines for a minute. I've always loved that story. He told me that story 20 years ago. I've always loved that story because I think it makes a great point that success isn't how we perhaps are used to defining it in society as a contest. Comparing other individuals between each other. Yes, that's one level of it, but maybe real success is that blind girl that learns how to function in life despite her obvious impairment or impossibility of having the visual acuity to be able to see things. Maybe it's that poor kid out of the ghetto that ends up making something of his or her life through hard work and somehow finding a way to get educated. Maybe it's that dirt farmer in 1935 in Oklahoma that somehow keeps his family alive in the old jalopy long enough to get him to California so they can survive a little longer. So I don't know that success is what we always define it to be in a sometimes superficial and shallow society, to see it only as the winner. I suspect that we all have moments of success and failure that have little to do with our station in life or even perhaps the contest we're in the moment. But really, true success is overcoming the initial limitations of our challenge. You had COVID last week. You were stuck in bed with the flu. You felt like you were dying. And, you know, there are people that in that circumstance would just use it as a way to validate why life can't be trusted. I'm going to die out of this, and I'm glad it's finally over because I'm tired of fighting it all. It's not what happened. You took care of yourself. You went to the doctor. You got cough syrup. You slept, and you're getting better. Who's to say that isn't a success that maybe in many ways is more important than some contest you would win at work or in sports because you've overcome the self as opposed to making it about a competition against other folks. Well, what do you see in all that, if anything, Stace?
Yeah, as we've been describing all this morning, we're thinking about athletes, and even Jimmy Hunter being the athlete that he was,
Mm-hmm.
even well into his 70s now. And I think about those of us who might not be in athletic competitions or think of ourselves as athletes at this point. Maybe we never did. But we have this life we're living, and it is, whether we like it or not, there is competition in our life, even if we aren't attaching ourselves to it. It exists. If you're a professional, you are in a business, you are competing to win business, you're competing to retain business, you're competing to impress your boss, whatever it may be. And so how do we in this day and age find our way to level 4 soul identity as opposed to our level 3 ego? And I think maybe every generation in the history of human beings have thought this, but it seems to me that it's more difficult now than ever before because of the media technology that we have and what the media pushes, what social media pushes. And it's almost like, can I post a picture that everybody will give? I'll have more likes than my friend had on their picture the other day, even if we're not thinking that. There's this subconscious thing happening because our ego wants to be recognized.
Right.
And so Al, I've been blessed to be associated with you and IMP for over a year now. And when I think about how do we get to this level 4, first of all, I think it has to come from an intellectual understanding of, oh, there are these stages we go through life, and I can get stuck. I can't get stuck in adolescence because I just physically grow beyond it, but maybe I can still behave that way. But
Mm-hmm.
I can't get stuck in level 3 ego identity for my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I can find moments of level 4 soul identity and bounce back and forth. And you and I talk about this all the time. I'm sure I do it perhaps parts of every day. But it takes a degree of enlightenment beyond just the intellectual. We have to have a heart of learning. We have to have a heart of understanding that maybe we don't know everything. Maybe the way we were validating ourselves when we were growing up was the praise we got from coaches, teachers, parents, whatever it may have been, that didn't intend to fuel that ego, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
And now we watch, particularly in an election year and all the other things, the bombardment of what's right and what's success and what's failure and who gets it and who doesn't get it and whose fault it is if you didn't get it. And it leads, in my opinion, to quite a bit of ugliness. And I'm sure those listening would understand what we mean by that. But it also gives us an opportunity to open our eyes about just our own lives and how we perceive that success. And I think back to that runner that hit the hurdle and went down. And I wonder today, is that person being blessed by a level 4 realization of the immense accomplishment of being there was? Or is the level 3 ego tearing them apart today, telling them what a failure they are? And as a part of a level 4 soul identity, I feel it, Al, for that person. I don't know that person, never will, but I feel it as part of humanity, and knowing that I can imagine the emotional tragedy that he may be feeling today. And my prayer is that he's not. And hopefully there are people around him that are saying, no, you're amazing. And, this doesn't define you. In fact, your character of getting up and finishing defines you more than winning a medal. And so I think there's beauty to be seen in lessons in everything we view, whether it's the Olympics or it's the blind girl figuring out how to make her way. We can see it, and we can see God in it every time that happens.
Yeah, maybe the whole premise of success itself is a framework of illusion. Mm. Because maybe success is a measure within a relative scale of worth as a broad category, and success is to get over some line. You've been very successful in life in a lot of ways, Stacy. You've influenced tens of thousands of people. You've created a great net worth and a great life. And you're clearly a heartfelt, spiritually enlightened guy with a great mind, with a lot of friends and a lot of people that love you. Now, on top of that, though, you've had your disappointments. You've had things you've fallen short on. You've had relationships that haven't been optimal. You've had things go the other direction. And what if God, the source, the universe, divinity, whatever your term is, what if the way the creator has set this up is to provide us a temptation for the measurement of life and our relative place within it, especially as an individual ego, in contrast and comparison to other egos, other people, to determine our relative worth. And we think it determines it to other people. It really is pretty rare that it really matters to other people. What matters is what you do with it. So, think about, I don't know, George Cagney or Robert Mitchum or John Wayne. These were all icons that were actors that were hugely successful. Today's generation doesn't remember who they are. Never heard the name, doesn't know who they are. And so how much did it really matter that in their moment in a space in history, they had relative success, Napoleon, whoever? Well, maybe the impact that it had on the world, but even then, that just history keeps flowing forward. So maybe the whole premise of success is a useful illusion that divinity uses to create the temptation of ego to try the strategy of living life on a relative basis of individual worth, my worth being somehow validated or invalidated by other people's walk, to invite this illusion of level 3 separation that creates our pain, creates our sense of disappointment, creates our sense of failure. And maybe all of that is designed to have us see the untrustworthiness of an ego-based reality, to ultimately have us exhaust the lack of long-term fulfillment from an ego-based relationship with the world, to seek level 4 soul-based identity through the portal of deciding that values matter more than my ego.
Mm.
I personally believe that my life will be successful to the extent that I've made the choices and taken the actions and had the intentionality to be an embodiment of certain values, without regard to whether anybody remembers I was ever even here. I've said for years, my ultimate goal would be to save the world and die anonymously without anybody knowing I had anything to do with it. Because I think that ideal for me represents a warning to not live my life through the lens that I need to adhere to a sense of self-worth based on the superficiality of relative temporary success, to puff myself up. Because the moment I do that, it means I'm also subject to the yin of that yang, so that when I don't complete the race and I don't win number one, and I lose my money and I lose my house and I lose my family or I lose whatever, then I have to fall on the sword and feel a lack of worth. I would offer that level 3 ego, as measured by the relative superficiality of the premise of success, is in itself what we have to move beyond into the place of meaning and peace and acceptance of the flow of life, without personalizing it to the illusion that I individually need to matter. I honestly don't, Stacy. I mean, if I've gotten anything from time in life, it's that what matters to me at this moment is you, and it's the people that may watch this video, to invite them into the possibility that they aren't just an individual human being. They are like an atom in God's body that is the universe, and they are given amnesia by design to think they're individually separate from it all, as part of the architecture of their awakening to one day in eternity ultimately realize that they were part of the whole all along, and therefore there was never any real competition. It was all just what the Hindus would call the dance of Leela, the dance of God. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's beautiful, and we're getting close to where we'll wrap up for this session. But I was thinking about, as you were describing that, and you used the word peace. I personally, in my own life, don't think I can find peace or freedom or joy or happiness as long as I'm living in my level 3 ego identity. There are moments of elation where you think, oh, look what I accomplished, or someone praised me and that makes me feel good. And so all of a sudden I become a people pleaser because it feeds me. I always heard that term, that I'm a person that wants to please other people. Well, I used to think about that. Well, that's what an internal good character, that I'd want to please you and make you feel good. That's not really why we do it. We do it because we want to get positive feedback to make ourselves feel good. And it's fleeting. It's not real. You'll always be disappointed by another human being if you're looking for your happiness to come from the result of how they interact with you. I'm a king of knowing that story for sure, but it's peace and joy and happiness that last is when we can move outside of ourselves and we can see the world as a part of our grand design, and that we got the honor of participating in it for some period of decades if we're so blessed. And in the end, we all come together, and it is always peace and joy and happiness and freedom. And I'm so glad that we get to do this, Al, because whether or not others are internally feeling change in their own lives by our message, I sure am every time we do this. So I'm grateful for that. And I hope that people do see this message today and think about, what am I dedicating myself in training for as an athlete, as a person? What am I dedicating my training to? And how will I define success as I go along that? How will I respond to failure? Because I guarantee you it will come in the way that we define success and failure. But can you find today, at this moment, can you find inside yourself this grander calling of setting aside ego and experiencing the enlightenment that comes from level 4 soul identity, and you cross over from the idea of success to significance.
Yeah, beautiful, because we often think of success having the effect of having admiration come to us from others that makes me feel like I'm admirable. But honestly, when I see like the Olympic example of the runners, to close it with that, who would I admire more? The person that tripped on the hurdle and then had the limp to the finish line, but had the humility and the nobility and the honor to truly and graciously congratulate the winner, or the winner that's arrogantly parading around saying, "Look at me, aren't I fabulous?"
Yeah.
I tend to notice that who I really consider successful and therefore admirable are people who have overcome their egos in favor of humility, overcome their need to be self-righteous and indignant when someone disagrees with them, in favor of a larger architecture of remembering what's love-worthy in the other person rather than what has obviated my perspective or my opinion about something. I find successful those people who have moved beyond the premise of ego-based success into the nobility of personifying values. The true heroes of this world, in my mind, are the Mother Teresa's and the little old lady with bunions that can barely walk, that bakes a not very good rhubarb pie and walks 3 blocks to the old folks' home to give it to another old person that hasn't had her children visit her in 3 months and just simply needed the human touch. Real success is spiritual practice of what the holy ones have taught us, without allowing it to merely remain in the conceptual realm, so we can deceive ourselves into thinking that we are holy because we conceptually believe in holy. And I say before them all, Stacy, whatever your story is and all that you've gone through, I think the purity of your relationship with life is a great honor to know, because I look at you and I hold myself up to say, I've got to become a little more like Stacy in my moments when I face disappointment, because you've been tremendously successful, not necessarily by the tremendous heights you've reached in business, probably more impressively by how you've responded to the disappointments and the lows and the nobility with which you have continued forth. So I'm honored we get to do these as well, as much as anything, because I think it reveals to people that you are someone who is courageously and effectively exemplifying what level 4 is, Stace.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Well, we often talk about the holy ones, and Al hates it when I say this, but I think Al's one of the holy ones. So sweet of you to say those things about me, but I would modeling you and how you see the world and behave is not only great for my life, but it's also an honor. So we thank you all for watching. We pray that you're blessed by it, and we look forward to our next conversation. And we hope you have a wonderful, blessed day. God bless.
Absolutely. Blessings, my friends.